Commander Jake Morrison had spent 15 years traveling through space, but nothing in all that time prepared him for what he saw that day. His ship called the Wanderer had received a distress signal from Broken Sky Station, and they had rushed to help, but when they arrived, it was already too late. The station floated in pieces with bodies drifting among the wreckage. Everyone was dead. Morrison stood on the bridge of his ship, staring at the destroyed station through the main viewing screen. His crew worked quietly around him, checking sensors and scanning for survivors, even though they all knew there would be none. Something had attacked the station with terrible force, and whatever it was, had left nothing alive. Lieutenant Amy Rodriguez sat at the communications station, her fingers moving quickly over the controls. She was young but skilled, and Morrison trusted her completely. She turned to look at him with worried eyes and reported that they were picking up strange energy readings near the station. Something was still out there moving through the debris. Morrison ordered the main screen to focus on the energy source, and what appeared made his breath catch in his throat. A woman who looked like she came from ancient fairy tales rode through the wreckage on the back of a creature that could only be described as a dragon. But this was no dragon from old Earth stories. This dragon was made of crystal and light, its body glowing with colors that seemed to shift and change. The woman had silver hair that flowed around her as if wind touched it, even though they were in the vacuum of space where no air existed. Her armor looked like it was made of metal and energy combined, constantly shifting between solid and transparent. The dragon she rode was the size of a small ship, and it moved with grace that seemed impossible for something so large. Rodriguez spoke again, telling Morrison that the woman was trying to communicate with them. The ship's translation computer was working on the message but having difficulty with the alien language. Morrison told her to play whatever they had. A voice filled the bridge, beautiful but tired sounding, like someone who had not rested in a very long time. The woman identified herself as Princess Lyra of the Stellari Covenant. She said that darkness was hunting her, and if the humans valued their lives, they should leave this sector of space immediately. 3 enemy ships were coming, and they would destroy anyone who got in their way. Morrison looked at his tactical display and saw that she was telling the Your Truth 3. Massive ships were approaching, fast, moving through space at incredible speed. The computer estimated they would arrive in less than 5 minutes. His small exploration vessel had weapons, but they were meant for defending against pirates, not fighting whatever those ships were. Rodriguez waited for his orders, her hands hovering over the controls ready to activate the engines and run. Morrison knew that would be the smart choice, the logical choice. His ship was not built for combat, and his crew of 40 people would not stand a chance against 3 warships. But Morrison had not joined the space exploration fleet because he always made the safe choice. He told Rodriguez to send a reply to the alien woman. Tell her that humans do not abandon people who need help. Tell her they were offering sanctuary. Rodriguez started to protest, saying that the woman was not exactly human, and they had no idea what they were getting involved in. Morrison cut her off gently, saying the woman was close enough, and that was what mattered. Rodriguez sent the message, and for a long moment nothing happened. Then a flash of light appeared on the bridge, so bright that everyone had to shield their eyes. When the light faded, Princess Lyra stood before them. Her dragon had vanished, but Morrison could see a metal collar around her neck that glowed with the same colors the dragon had shown. Princess Lyra was tall and elegant, with violet eyes that seemed to look right through a person. Her armor was still shifting between solid and energy, and up close, Morrison could see that she looked exhausted. Dark circles under her eyes spoke of too many nights without sleep. Her hands trembled slightly, as if she had been fighting for so long that her body barely remembered how to rest. Morrison had prepared for this moment in a way he had not fully understood. Until now, he walked to a small locker near his command chair and pulled out something he had carried with him for 5 years. It was a music box, simple and plain, made of wood and metal. His daughter had built it for him before she died of a sickness. the doctors could not cure. The box was not fancy or expensive, but it was precious to him. He walked up to Princess Lyra and held out the music box. She stared at it with confusion, clearly not understanding what it was or why he was offering it. Morrison opened the box and a gentle melody began to play. The sound was soft and sweet, filling the bridge with a sense of peace. Princess Lyra's eyes went wide and suddenly tears began streaming down her face. She reached out with shaking hands and took the music box from him, holding it like it was the most valuable thing in the universe. She stood there listening to the simple melody and crying. Morrison did not understand why such a simple thing affected her so strongly, but he could see that it did. After a long moment, Lyra looked up at him and spoke in a voice filled with emotion. She said that Morrison could not possibly understand what he had just done. The music from the box was the first thing she had heard in 3 cycles that was not screaming or the sound of war drums. It was the first beautiful sound she had experienced in years. The metal collar around her neck suddenly flared with light, and the dragon appeared again, filling the bridge with its massive crystalline body. But this time, it was different. Before, the dragon had glowed with an angry red color, but now it shone with peaceful blue light. Lyra explained that her dragon called Starfire was bonded to her soul. The creature responded to her emotions, reflecting what she felt. If she felt anger, the dragon became a weapon of destruction. If she felt fear, the dragon grew weak. But right now, because of the simple music box Morrison had given her, she felt something she had almost forgotten. She felt hope. Morrison was about to ask more questions when every alarm on the ship started blaring. The 3 enemy ships had arrived, and they were like nothing Morrison had ever seen. They were not built like normal ships. Instead, they seemed to twist and fold space around themselves. Their hulls were black, darker than the space around them, as if they absorbed all light that touched them. Rodriguez shouted over the alarms, asking for orders. Morrison commanded shields up and all weapons ready, but even as he gave the orders, he knew they were pointless. His little exploration ship could not fight those monsters. Princess Lyra stepped forward, the music box now secured to her belt. Starfire grew larger until the dragon barely fit on the bridge, its body seeming to exist in multiple places. At the same time, Lyra said that Morrison weapons would not work. The enemy called the Void. Scourge existed between dimensions. They fed on fear and despair, growing stronger every time they consumed a world. Morrison demanded to know how they were supposed to fight an enemy like that. Lyra smiled, but it was a sad smile. She said they could not fight. The Scourge was too powerful, but she could fight. She had been trained for this. Her whole life had prepared her for war against the darkness. She placed her hand on Starfire, and suddenly Morrison felt something strange. It was like a door opened in his mind and images flooded through. He saw Lyra homeworld, a beautiful place with silver towers reaching into golden skies. He saw her people, the Stellari, living in peace and prosperity. Their civilization had lasted for thousands of years, creating art and music and technology beyond human understanding. Then he saw the Void, Scourge, arrive, dark ships appearing from nowhere, attacking without warning. He watched cities burn and people die. He felt Lyra's desperation as she tried to save her family, her friends, her entire world. But there were too many enemies and too few defenders. The Stellari Covenant fell world after world, consumed by living darkness. In their final days, the Stellari created a desperate weapon. They took the core of their dying sun and forged it into bond companions, living dragons of crystal and energy that could bond with a warrior's soul. These dragons could fight the Void. Scourge could hurt them in ways normal weapons could not. But there was a price. The dragons fed on emotion. To power them for battle, the riders had to sustain negative feelings: rage, hatred, pain, fear. These emotions made the dragons strong, made them fierce warriors. The problem was, that maintaining those feelings day after day, year after year, slowly destroyed the riders Lyra had been fighting for 3 cycles. 9 years by human time, 9 years of constant battle, 9 years of forcing herself to feel nothing but anger and hate, because the moment she felt joy or peace, Starfire would weaken and they would both die. Until today. Until Morrison gave her a music box and reminded her that beauty still existed in the universe. The vision ended, and Morrison found himself back on his bridge, gasping for breath. He understood now why Lyra had cried. The music box had given her hope without weakening her bond. That should have been impossible, unless human emotions were somehow different from other species. The void. Scourge ships opened fire. Black tendrils of energy shot across space, tearing through the Wanderer shields like they were made of paper. The ship shook violently and sparks flew from damaged consoles. Morrison shouted for everyone to evacuate the bridge to get to the escape pods while they still could. Lyra said no, just one word, but filled with absolute certainty. She raised her hand, and Starfire roared. The sound was like crystal bells mixed with thunder, beautiful and terrifying. At the same time, she looked at Morrison and asked if he trusted her. Morrison thought about his daughter who had died too young. He thought about his crew who depended on him to keep them safe. He thought about all the innocent people across the galaxy who would die if the Void Scourge was not stopped, and he looked at this alien warrior who had lost everything but still fought on. He told Princess Lyra that he trusted her. She pressed her hand against his chest right over his heart and told him to remember every good thing he had ever experienced. Every moment of love, every time he felt proud, every instance of joy or peace or hope. He should think about all of it and let her feel it too. Morrison closed his eyes and let the memories flow. His daughter laughing as he pushed her on a swing, his wife kissing him on their wedding day. The first time he sat in a captain chair and realized his dream had come true. Every birthday, every holiday, every quiet moment of contentment, all of it flowed from him to Lyra. Starfire exploded with golden light so bright it lit up the entire bridge. The dragon grew and grew until it was larger than the ship. Its color changed from blue to blazing gold like a sunrise. The dragon roared again, and this time Morrison heard triumph in that sound. Lyra looked at Morrison with wonder in her eyes and said, now they would fight. And this time the darkness would learn what it meant to face hope that refused to die. Starfire launched from the bridge of the Wanderer, phasing through the metal walls like they did not exist. The dragon expanded in size until it matched the 3 Void Scourge vessels that surrounded them. Princess Lyra sat mounted on the dragon, back her silver hair streaming behind her, and her armor blazing with golden light that matched Starfire glow. Commander Morrison collapsed into his command chair, feeling like someone had drained all the energy from his body. But at the same time, he felt more alive than he had in years. Through the viewing screen, he watched Lyra fly toward the first enemy ship with speed that made his head spin. Lieutenant Rodriguez worked frantically at her station, trying to make sense of the readings her instruments were showing. She reported that the energy coming from Starfire was enormous, but it was unlike anything in their database. The computer kept classifying it as positive energy, which, according to everything they knew about physics, should not be possible. Morrison told her it made perfect sense and ordered her to open a channel to every human ship within range. They needed to broadcast on all frequencies emergency priority. Rodriguez looked confused, but followed his orders. Within seconds, the comm system was active, and Morrison could reach every vessel in 50 light years. He identified himself and his ship, then began to explain what was happening. They had encountered an alien warrior named Princess Lyra, who was fighting an enemy called the Void Scourge. This enemy fed on fear and despair, growing stronger with each world they destroyed. But humans had something different. Humans had hope that refused to die. As Morrison spoke, he watched through the screen as Starfire attacked the first Void Scourge ship. The dragon claws made of crystal and light raked across the enemy vessel. impossible geometry, and where they struck, the darkness literally burned away like paper in fire. Underneath the darkness, Morrison could see twisted metal that looked more like it had grown than been built. He told every human listening to think about why they were out here in the vast emptiness of space. Think about the people they loved waiting for them back home. Think about the dreams they were chasing. Think about the future they wanted to build for their children and grandchildren. He needed everyone to feel those emotions as strongly as they could and broadcast them, because their new ally could turn hope into a weapon. For a moment, there was only silence. Morrison wondered if anyone was listening, if anyone believed what he was saying. Then Rodriguez gasped and reported that ships were responding, 15 vessels at first, then 20, then 30. All of them were broadcasting on emotional frequency bands that the Stellari technology could detect. Outside the Wanderer, starfire grew even larger. The golden light pouring from the dragon intensified until it was almost too bright to look at. Morrison shielded his eyes, but kept watching as Princess Lyra guided her mount in a spiral around the first Void Scourge ship. Starfire opened its mouth and breathed a stream of golden fire that pierced through the enemy vessel from one side to the other. The Void Scourge ship made a sound like metal screaming. It tried to open one of its dimensional portals to escape, but the golden light had damaged its engines. The ship began to break apart piece by piece until it finally exploded in a flash of dark energy that quickly faded, leaving nothing behind. One enemy ship destroyed, but 2 remained, and they were learning from their companion mistake. They began weaving patterns in space, using tendrils of black energy to create what looked like a cage. They were trying to trap Starfire, trying to surround the dragon with walls of pure despair. Morrison felt his heart sink. The trap was working. Starfire movements became slower, more labored. The golden light began to dim as the darkness pressed in from all sides. Princess Lyra's voice suddenly echoed through the comm system of the Wanderer, even though no one had given her access to their communications. She called out to all humans within range and said that their gift of hope was remarkable beyond words. But she needed more. The Void Scourge were ancient. They had been destroying civilizations for thousands of years. They had consumed over 1,000 different species and learned from each one. To defeat them here and now, she needed something they had never encountered before. Morrison asked what she needed without hesitation. What could humans give her that would make a difference? Lyra's response surprised everyone on the bridge. She said she needed stories. The myths and legends that humans told each other. The tales of heroes who stood against impossible odds and won anyway. The fairy tales that parents told their children at bedtime. The epic poems about brave warriors and clever tricksters. Every story where good triumphed over evil, no matter how dark things seemed. Lyra explained that she could feel something unique in human emotional resonance. Humans were natural storytellers. Every human carried dozens or hundreds of stories in their mind, tales that gave them strength when they were afraid, hope when things seemed hopeless. She asked them to share those stories, to broadcast them as strongly as they could, and she would take those stories and make them real. Rodriguez turned to Morrison with doubt written all over her face. She said quietly that the request sounded completely insane. How could stories help fight ships that could tear apart space itself? Morrison grinned despite the desperate situation and replied that the best ideas usually sounded crazy. At first, he ordered Rodriguez to keep the fleet wide channel open and told every human ship in range to give Princess Lyra what she asked for. Share your stories, share your myths, share every tale of courage and hope you know. The response was immediate. 50 human ships began broadcasting at once. Engineers recited technical manuals about machines they had built and problems they had solved. Doctors spoke about patients they had saved, about lives that had hung in the balance, but survived. Scientists talked about discoveries that had changed the world, about mysteries they had unraveled through hard work and determination. Parents thought about their children and the bedtime stories they told, stories of knights fighting dragons, of clever rabbits outwitting wolves, of ordinary people doing extraordinary things. Soldiers remembered tales of battles won against terrible odds. Musicians thought of songs that lifted spirits in dark times. All of this flowed through space like invisible rivers of light. All of it was drawn toward Princess Lyra like iron filings to a magnet, and something impossible began to happen. Starfire body started to fracture into thousands of crystalline pieces. Morrison thought for a horrible moment that the dragon was breaking apart, dying under the pressure of the Void Scourge trap. But instead, each fragment began to change shape. Each piece became something new. Ghostly figures formed around Princess Lyra, warriors from human mythology made real through Stellari technology and human imagination. Morrison saw knights in shining armor carrying swords that glowed with inner light. He saw samurai with blades that cut through darkness itself. He saw ancient heroes from a dozen different cultures, all made of golden crystal, all fighting alongside the alien princess. The warriors attacked the cage of darkness that surrounded Starfire. Their weapons, which should not have existed, cut through the black tendrils like they were nothing. More and more warriors appeared as more humans shared their stories. An army of legends surrounded the two remaining Void Scourge vessels. Rodriguez whispered that it was impossible, but her instruments showed it was really happening. Lyra was somehow taking human stories and manifesting them as actual combat constructs, using them to fight the poor enemy. The tide of battle turned completely. The two Void Scourge ships found themselves overwhelmed by an army that, according to all laws of reality, should not exist. They tried to fight back, sending out waves of despair, trying to weaken the story warriors. But the constructs were made of hope and imagination, and those things could not be destroyed by darkness alone. Morrison watched in awe as a knight made of golden light charged one of the Void Scourge ships and drove his glowing sword deep into its hull. Where the blade struck, the darkness peeled away, and the ship's structure began to collapse. A samurai leaped onto the other ship, moving with impossible speed and grace, cutting through weapon systems and engines with precise strikes. Princess Lyra guided Starfire through the chaos. The dragon had reformed into its complete shape, but now it was larger and brighter than before. The army of story warriors fought with perfect coordination, each one knowing exactly what to do, because they were extensions of Lyra will powered by human imagination. The second void. Scourge ship tried to retreat, opening a portal to its dimensional hiding place, but three warriors threw spears of light that struck the portal generator. The device exploded and the portal collapsed, trapping the ship in normal space. Starfire descended on it like a hawk on a mouse. The dragon claws tore through the hull and golden fire poured into the breach. The ship lasted only seconds before it broke apart, consumed by light, the final void. Scourge vessel tried desperately to escape. It abandoned all attempts to fight and poured every bit of power into its engines trying to run, but the story warriors surrounded it, blocking every escape route. Princess Lyra raised her hand, and the warriors attacked as one. The last enemy ship died in an explosion of dark energy that quickly faded. When the light cleared, there was nothing left but debris floating in space. The battle was over. The three Void Scourge vessels that had destroyed Broken Sky Station and killed everyone aboard were gone. The army of story warriors began to fade, dissolving back into golden light that flowed back into Starfire. The dragon shrank, returning to a more normal size, and Princess Lyra guided her mount back toward the Wanderer. When they materialized on the bridge, Starfire had reduced itself to the size of a large horse. Princess Lyra dismounted and walked toward Morrison. She still carried his music box attached to her belt, and her violet eyes shone with tears. Her voice was soft when she spoke. She thanked Morrison for everything he had done for the gift he had given her. Morrison smiled and said he had only given her a simple music box. She was the one who had turned it into something that could save lives. Lyra shook her head firmly and said Morrison did not understand yet. He had given her something far more valuable than any weapon or technology. She gestured toward Starfire, who rumbled contentedly beside her. The Bond companions had always been meant to run on positive emotions: joy, hope, love, courage. But after centuries of war against the Void Scourge, the Stellari had convinced themselves that only negative emotions were strong enough. Only rage and hatred and pain could power the dragons for battle. Morrison had proved them wrong. A human had walked up to a stranger from another world and offered a gift with no expectation of reward. That simple act of kindness had given Lyra hope, and that hope had powered Starfire to become stronger than rage ever could. That was why the Void Scourge feared humans now. Not because humans had powerful weapons or advanced technology, but because humans remembered how to hope, even when everything said they should give up. Humans told stories about heroes winning against impossible odds and then believed those stories enough to make them real. Morrison was about to respond when every alarm on the ship started blaring again. Rodriguez spun in her chair, her face pale. She reported that long-range sensors were picking up massive energy signatures, a fleet of Void. Scourge ships, much larger than the 3 they had just fought, was heading toward human space, toward Earth itself. Morrison felt his blood turn to ice. Earth was home to 3 billion people. Most of them had no idea that aliens existed, much less that a war was being fought in the darkness between stars. They would have no warning, no time to prepare. Princess Lyra's expression hardened into determination. She said the enemy was making a statement. They wanted to strike at the heart of humanity to destroy the source of this new hope before it could spread any further. The Void Scourge had finally recognized humans as a real threat. Morrison asked how many Bond riders Lyra could gather. How many warriors like her existed? Lyra replied that she would bring every rider who still lived, every Stellari warrior who had survived the fall of their civilization. But she warned that even with human help, even with hope as their weapon defending an entire planet against the largest Void Scourge fleet ever assembled, would take more than courage. It would take a miracle. Morrison looked at the alien princess standing on his bridge. He thought about his daughter who had died too young. He thought about every human on Earth who deserved a chance to live. He thought about the music box, and how such a small thing had led to all of this. He told Princess Lyra that humanity had been running on miracles since the first humans looked up at the stars and dreamed of touching them. One more miracle seemed about right. The journey back to Earth took 3 days, traveling as fast as the Wanderer engines could manage. During that time, Princess Lyra used the ship communications to contact other Stellari survivors scattered across the galaxy. She sent out a call to every Bond rider still alive, telling them that hope had been found in the most unexpected place. Commander Morrison spent those 3 days coordinating with Earth defense forces and human colonies throughout the solar system. He explained the situation as clearly as he could. An alien enemy was coming. An enemy that fed on fear and could destroy planets. They had maybe a week before the Void Scourge fleet arrived. The response from Earth government was chaos. Some officials refused to believe aliens existed at all. They thought Morrison had gone mad from too much time in space. Others believed, but wanted to surrender immediately, arguing that fighting was pointless if the enemy was as powerful as Morrison claimed. A few brave leaders understood that humanity had no choice but to stand and fight. Lieutenant Rodriguez worked day and night, helping Morrison organize the defense. She contacted every human warship in range, calling them back to Earth. She helped civilian ships evacuate from vulnerable stations, moving as many people as possible to safer locations, and she kept monitoring long-range sensors, watching the Void Scourge fleet get closer and closer. On the second day, Princess Lyra received responses from other Bond riders. 43 Stellari warriors confirmed they would come to Earth bringing their dragon companions to join the fight. It was a small number considering the enemy they faced, but Lyra said it was more riders than had fought together since the fall of the Stellari homeworld. Morrison asked Lyra to explain more about the Bond companions and how they worked. She sat with him in the ship, small briefing room, and told him the history of her people. The Stellari had been peaceful for thousands of years. They had explored the galaxy, making friends with dozens of species. They had created art and music and technology focused on beauty rather than war. When the Void Scourge first appeared, the Stellari had no weapons that could hurt them. The enemy ships existed partially in another dimension, making them immune to normal attacks. Stellari scientists worked desperately to find a solution. They studied the Scourge, trying to understand how creatures could feed on emotion. What they discovered was that the Void Scourge were not truly alive in the way most beings were. They were more like parasites that existed in the space between dimensions. They entered normal space only to feed, draining the emotional energy from living beings. Fear and despair were their favorite food because those emotions were strong and easy to create. The Stellari realized that if negative emotions could feed the Scourge, then perhaps positive emotions could harm them. But how could they weaponize something like hope or joy? The answer came from an old Stellari legend about dragons that lived in the heart of stars. Using technology that pushed the limits of what was possible, Stellari scientists extracted core material from their dying sun. This material existed in multiple dimensions at once, just like the Void Scourge. They shaped it into living constructs, bond companions that could bridge the gap between dimensions. Each bond companion was paired with a warrior. The dragon would bond to the warrior's soul, responding to their emotions, amplifying them and turning them into weapons. When the warrior felt rage, the dragon could channel that into devastating attacks. When the warrior felt courage, the dragon became nearly invulnerable. But there was a dark side to the bond. Negative emotions were easier to sustain than positive ones. It was simple to stay angry when you watched your world burn. It was easy to feel hatred toward an enemy that killed your family. Over time, the Stellari Bond Riders fell into a terrible pattern. They used rage to power their dragons because rage was always available. The problem was that living in constant anger slowly destroyed the riders. Some went mad from the strain. Others became so consumed by hatred that they could no longer remember what they were fighting for. The Bond companions reflected this deterioration, becoming more savage and less controlled. Lyra had been one of the last riders trained before the Stellari homeworld fell. She had fought for 9 years, sustaining herself on rage and pain, watching other riders die or lose their minds. The music box Morrison gave her was the first time in all those years she had felt genuine hope, and that hope had not weakened Starfire. It had made the dragon stronger. Morrison listened to her story and understood why she had cried when he offered that simple gift. He had accidentally discovered something the Stellari had forgotten. Positive emotions were not weaker than negative ones. They were just harder to maintain during war, but if you could hold on to hope even in darkness, it burned brighter than any rage. On the 3rd day, they arrived at Earth. Morrison stood on the bridge and looked at his homeworld through the viewing screen, blue and white and green floating in the black of space. 3 billion people lived down there, going about their daily lives. Most of them had no idea what was coming. The fleet that had assembled to defend Earth was impressive by human standards. 70 warships from various colonies and defense forces. They were good ships with brave crews, but they were designed to fight pirates and smugglers, not dimensional horrors that could crack planets. The Stellari Bond Riders began arriving throughout the day. 43 warriors on 43 dragons appeared in flashes of light, taking up positions around Earth. Each dragon was different, reflecting the personality of its rider. Some were sleek and quick, while others were massive and powerful. They glowed with various colors, though none shone with the pure gold that Starfire displayed. Princess Lyra held a war council, bringing together human military commanders and Stellari riders. Morrison attended along with Rodriguez and several Earth defense admirals. The mood in the meeting was grim. Everyone knew the odds they faced. Admiral Chen spoke first, representing Earth Defense Forces. She asked Lyra directly if they had any chance of winning this fight. Lyra paused before answering, and Morrison could see her choosing her words carefully. The princess said that normally the answer would be no. The Void. Scourge fleet heading toward them was the largest anyone had seen in decades, at least 50 capital ships plus hundreds of smaller vessels. Even with the Bond Riders and the human fleet, they were outnumbered and outgunned by a massive margin. But Lyra said something had changed. The battle at Broken Sky Station had proved that human emotional resonance was different from other species. Somehow human hope could power Bond companions more effectively than the emotions of any other race. The Stellari did not fully understand why, but the evidence was clear. If they could amplify that effect, somehow spread human hope across the entire battlefield, then maybe, just maybe, they could win. Lyra explained that she had been working on a plan with Stellari engineers. They had studied human technology and found something interesting. Humans used satellites for communication, spreading signals across vast distances. What if they could build satellites that broadcast emotional energy instead of radio waves? What if they could create a network that would amplify human hope and beam it directly to the Bond Riders in battle? The dragons would become vastly more powerful, fed by the emotions of 3 billion humans instead of just their individual riders. Admiral Chen asked how long it would take to build such satellites. Lyra said the Stellari had the technology ready. They just needed human help to manufacture and deploy them. Working together, they could have the network in place within 5 days. Morrison pointed out that according to their sensor readings, the Void Scourge fleet would arrive in 6 days. That left almost no margin for error. One delay, one mistake, and the network would not be ready in time. Chen looked around the table at the assembled commanders and asked for opinions. One admiral argued they should evacuate Earth instead. Use the time to get as many people away as possible. Morrison shook his head and explained that evacuation was impossible. There were not enough ships to move 3 billion people. Even if they had the ships, where would everyone go? The Void. Scourge controlled most of this region of space. Another commander suggested trying to negotiate with the enemy, asking for terms of surrender. Lyra's face hardened, and she said the Void Scourge did not negotiate. They consumed everything in their path. They would drain Earth of all emotional energy, leaving behind a dead world full of empty husks that had once been human. Chen made the decision. They would build the satellite network. They would fight. They would defend humanity. Homeworld with everything they had. And if they failed, at least they would fail while fighting back, not cowering in fear. The next 5 days were a frenzy of activity. Human engineers worked alongside Stellari technicians, building satellites unlike anything that had existed before. Each satellite contained Stellari technology that could detect and amplify emotional energy, combined with human communication systems that could broadcast across vast distances. Morrison barely slept during those 5 days. He coordinated construction efforts, organized the deployment of satellites, and worked with military commanders to plan battle. Strategy. Rodriguez stayed by his side, managing 1,000 details and keeping track of the countdown to the enemy arrival. Princess Lyra spent her time training human crews on how to work with Bond Riders. Most humans had never seen a dragon before, and the sight of massive crystalline creatures was intimidating. Lyra taught them that the dragons were not monsters. They were warriors fighting to protect the innocent, just like human soldiers. On the evening of the 5th day, the last satellite was deployed. The network was complete, covering Earth and the surrounding space in an invisible web of amplification nodes. Lyra tested the system and confirmed it was working. Human emotional energy was being collected and broadcast to all the Bond Riders. Morrison felt strange knowing that his emotions were being transmitted across space. That somewhere, Stellari warriors were feeling echoes of what he felt. But if his hope could help keep Earth safe, then he would gladly share it. The Void Scourge fleet arrived early on the 6th day. They did not bother with stealth or deception. 50 massive capital ships emerged from dimensional portals surrounding Earth like a noose. Each ship was kilometers long, twisted and black, seeming to absorb light rather than reflect it. Hundreds of smaller vessels swarmed around the capitals like insects. Morrison stood on the bridge of the Wanderer, which had taken a position near the moon. Rodriguez worked her station with quick, efficient movements. Admiral Chen commanded the human fleet from the flagship Unity, while Princess Lyra coordinated the Bond Riders from Starfire back. For a long moment, there was silence as both sides assessed each other. The human fleet looked tiny compared to the Void Scourge Armada, 70 ships against hundreds. The 43 Bond Riders seemed insignificant against 50 capital vessels. Any logical assessment said this battle was already lost. Then Princess Lyra's voice rang out across all channels, both human and Stellari. She spoke of courage and sacrifice. She reminded everyone what they were fighting for. The people on Earth who deserved a chance to live. The future that belonged to those who had the strength to defend it. She said humans had taught her something important. Hope was not about believing you would win. It was about fighting anyway, even when victory seemed impossible. It was about standing up and saying that some things were worth dying for. Morrison felt something strange happen. The satellite network activated fully, and suddenly he could feel the emotions of people all across Earth, parents holding their children, soldiers preparing for battle, scientists working on last-minute improvements to weapons, ordinary people in cities and farms and everywhere in between, all feeling fear, yes, but also determination. The collective emotion of 3 billion humans flowed through the network and reached the Bond Riders. Every dragon blazed with golden light so bright it rivaled the sun. Starfire grew to twice its normal size, and Lyra laughed with pure joy. She gave the order to attack, and 43 dragons charged toward the Void Scourge fleet with humanity, hope burning like fire in their hearts. The battle for Earth began with a flash of golden light that could be seen from the planet's surface. 43 Bond Riders charged toward the Void Scourge fleet, their dragons blazing with power drawn from 3 billion human hearts. The enemy responded immediately, sending waves of smaller ships forward to meet the attack. Commander Morrison watched from the bridge of the Wanderer as the two forces collided. The Void Scourge fighters were fast and deadly, firing weapons that twisted space itself, but the Bond Dragons tore through them like they were made of paper. Starfire led the charge with Princess Lyra on its back. The dragon breathed golden fire that consumed entire squadrons of enemy ships. Lieutenant Rodriguez reported that the satellite network was functioning perfectly. Human emotional energy was flowing to the Bond Riders in a steady stream. The dragons were stronger than they had ever been, moving faster, hitting harder, glowing so bright they were almost painful to look at. But the Void Scourge capital ships had not yet entered the fight. They hung back behind their screen of smaller vessels, watching and waiting. Morrison realized with growing dread that the enemy was studying the Bond Riders, learning their capabilities before committing to full battle. Admiral Chen's voice came over the fleet channel ordering human ships forward. The 70 warships of Earth Defense Forces moved into formation and began engaging the Void Scourge fighters. Human weapons were less effective than dragon fire, but they could still damage the enemy. Missiles and energy beams lit up the darkness of space. Morrison ordered his own ship forward, even though the Wanderer was an exploration vessel, not a warship. Rodriguez protested that they should stay back, let the real combat ships handle the fighting. But Morrison shook his head. They had started this by offering help to an alien princess. They would see it through to the end. The Wanderer joined the battle, firing its modest weapons at enemy fighters. Morrison was no combat pilot, but his crew did their best. They destroyed 2 Void Scourge ships and damaged several others before having to pull back when their shields began failing. All across the battlefield, similar scenes played out. Human ships fought with desperate courage, knowing they were protecting their homeworld. Bond riders carved through enemy formations, leaving trails of golden light. Explosions lit the darkness as ships from both sides died in fire. Then the Void Scourge capital ships moved forward, and everything changed. The massive vessels had weapons that dwarfed anything the humans possessed. They fired beams of darkness that seemed to unravel the fabric of space. One beam struck a human destroyer, and the ship simply ceased to exist. Not exploding, but vanishing, as if it had never been. Princess Lyra saw the danger and redirected the Bond riders toward the capital ships. She knew that if those giants reached Earth itself, the planet was doomed. Their weapons could crack continents and boil oceans. 43 dragons attacked the nearest capital ship, swarming it from all sides. Morrison watched as Starfire landed on the hull of the massive vessel and Lyra dismounted. She carried a sword made of the same crystalline material as her dragon, and she began cutting through the ship armor. Other riders followed her example, using their weapons to tear into the enemy vessel, but there were 50 capital ships and only 43 riders. The Void Scourge adapted quickly, sending their remaining fighters to harass the dragons, forcing them to divide their attention between offense and defense. The battle began to turn against the defenders. Morrison saw a dragon go down, struck by multiple enemy beams. The rider managed to guide his companion away from the main battle, but they were clearly out of the fight. Another dragon took a direct hit from a capital ship weapon, its crystalline body shattered, and both dragon and rider died in a flash of fading light. Rodriguez's voice was tight with stress as she reported casualty numbers. 4 human ships destroyed, a dozen more damaged, 3 Bond riders killed or critically injured. The enemy had lost many more ships, but they had so many more to lose. The mathematics of the battle were brutal and clear. The defenders could not win through attrition. Admiral Chen made a difficult decision. She ordered the human fleet to pull back to form a defensive line closer to Earth. The Bond riders would continue their attack on the capital ships, while human vessels protected the planet itself from any enemy fighters that got through. Princess Lyra agreed with the strategy, but Morrison could hear the strain in her voice. The Bond riders were fighting magnificently, powered by human hope, but there were simply too many enemies. Even with the satellite network amplifying their abilities, the dragons could not be everywhere at once. Morrison watched helplessly as more ships died, both human and Stellari. The Void Scourge pressed their advantage, sending capital ships forward in groups. The first group reached firing range of Earth and unleashed their weapons. Beams of darkness lanced toward the planet's surface. Human defense satellites intercepted some of the beams, destroying themselves to protect the world below. Others got through. One beam struck the Pacific Ocean, and a column of steam rose kilometers into the air. Another hit Antarctica, vaporizing ice and rock. The damage was limited, but it was a terrifying preview of what would happen if the enemy fleet reached Earth unopposed. Lyra made a decision that Morrison knew must have cost her greatly. She ordered the Bond riders to focus everything on stopping the capital ships from getting closer to Earth, even if it meant ignoring the smaller vessels. Even if it meant taking damage themselves, the dragons formed a living wall between the enemy and humanity homeworld. The sacrifice was immediate and terrible. Void. Scourge fighters swarmed the Bond riders, attacking from behind, while the dragons focused on the capital ships. Morrison watched as dragon after dragon took hits. Some riders managed to survive and retreat. Others died defending a world that was not even their own. Rodriguez was crying openly now as she tracked the casualties. 15 Bond riders down, more than a third of their force. The human fleet had lost 20 ships with many more damaged, but they were holding the capital ship's advance, had stalled, held back by the desperate courage of alien warriors fighting for humanity. Then something unexpected happened. The satellite network began fluctuating wildly. Rodriguez reported that emotional energy readings from Earth were spiking to unprecedented levels. Morrison looked at the data and understood what was happening. People on Earth were watching. The battle cameras on defense satellites were broadcasting images of dragons dying to protect the planet. Humans all across the world were seeing alien beings sacrifice themselves for strangers. They were witnessing courage on a scale that defied comprehension, and they were responding. Every person on Earth who saw those images felt something powerful. Gratitude for the sacrifice being made. Determination that it should not be in vain. Hope that if these alien warriors could fight so bravely, then maybe humanity could win after all. That emotional response fed back through the satellite network, amplified 1 billion times over. The surviving Bond riders suddenly blazed with light so intense it overwhelmed the viewing screens. Starfire grew to 3 times its normal size. Princess Lyra laughed with fierce joy as power like she had never felt before flooded through her bond. The tide of battle turned. The enhanced dragons attacked with renewed fury. They tore through capital ship armor like it was cloth. They breathed fire that melted metal and shattered dimensional barriers. One by one, the massive Void Scourge vessels began to die. Morrison allowed himself to hope that maybe they really could win this. But then Rodriguez screamed a warning. Sensors showed a new energy signature appearing behind the Void Scourge fleet. Something massive was coming through a dimensional portal. Something that made the capital ships look small. What emerged was a nightmare given form. A Void Scourge command ship 10 times larger than the capital vessels. Its hull was so black it seemed to create a hole in space. The ship radiated wrongness, like reality itself bent around it. Princess Lyra's voice came over the channel tight with fear. She said that was a devourer, a ship designed to consume entire planets in a single attack. The Stellari had only encountered 3 of them in the entire war, and they had never managed to destroy one. Every time a devourer appeared, the best outcome was retreat. But there was nowhere to retreat. To Earth was right behind them. Morrison asked what they should do, how they could fight such a monster. Lyra was silent for a long moment before answering. She said there was one technique that might work, but it was incredibly dangerous. The Stellari called it a harmony pulse. A Bond rider could focus all the emotional energy flowing through the satellite network channel it through themselves and their dragon and release it in one massive burst. The pulse would flood the area with so much positive energy that Void Scourge ships would be burned away instantly. The problem was that channeling that much energy would destroy the focal point. No living being was meant to hold the emotions of billions passing through their mind all at once. The rider who created the harmony pulse would die along with their dragon. Morrison felt his stomach drop as he realized what Lyra was suggesting. She was volunteering to sacrifice herself and Starfire to save Earth. He started to protest, but she cut him off. Lyra said she had lost everything when the Stellari fell. Her family, her friends, her entire civilization was gone. She had been fighting for 9 years with nothing but rage keeping her alive, until Morrison gave her a music box and reminded her that life could still be beautiful. If she could die, protecting that beauty, protecting the humans who had given her hope again, then it would be a good death. Morrison told her no with every bit of authority he could put into his voice. She had sacrificed enough, she had fought long enough, she deserved to live to see the peace that would come after this war. He said this was his world, his people, his responsibility, and he would be the one to create the harmony pulse. Rodriguez grabbed his arm, begging him not to do this, but Morrison had already made his choice. He told her to take care of the Wanderer and to make sure his grandchildren knew that he died fighting for something that mattered. Before anyone could stop him, Morrison suited up and headed for the airlock. Princess Lyra and Starfire met him in space. The dragon had tears in its crystalline eyes. Morrison mounted Starfire, and Lyra explained quickly how to channel the energy, let it flow through him, feel everything that humanity felt, and amplify it with his own will. Starfire carried Morrison toward Earth, positioning between the planet and the Devourer. The command ship was charging its main weapon, preparing to fire the shot that would crack the planet in half. Morrison could feel the satellite network humming with power. 3 billion humans hoping, praying, fighting for survival. He opened himself to that flood of emotion, and it hit him like a physical force. Joy and fear. Love and anger. Hope and despair. All of it flowing through his mind at once. It was too much. No one person should feel this much. But Morrison held on. He thought of his daughter who had died too young. He thought of every person on Earth who deserved a chance to live. The energy built and built, channeled through Morrison will and amplified by Starfire. Crystalline body, golden light erupted from the dragon, spreading in waves that washed across the battlefield. Where the light touched void-scourged ships, they simply vanished, consumed by overwhelming positive energy. The Devourer fired its weapon at the same moment. Morrison released the Harmony Pulse. The beam of darkness met the wave of light, and for a moment they seemed evenly matched. Then the light pushed forward slowly at first, but gaining momentum. The darkness could not stand against hope, backed by the will of an entire world. The Harmony Pulse engulfed the Devourer, and the massive ship died. Its hull cracked apart, and golden fire poured through the gaps. Within seconds, nothing remained of the vessel that had terrified the galaxy. The pulse continued outward, catching the remaining capital ships and destroying them one after another. Morrison felt his mind beginning to fracture under the strain. No human was meant to channel this much emotion. His last conscious thought was that it had been worth it. All of it. Everything he had done and everything he had sacrificed was worth it. If Earth survived. Then darkness took him, and Commander Jake Morrison knew no more. Commander Jake Morrison woke slowly, feeling like he was swimming up from the bottom of a very deep ocean. His body ached everywhere, and his head felt like someone had filled it with static. He tried to open his eyes, and bright light made him wince. He heard voices around him speaking in urgent tones. Gradually, his vision cleared, and Morrison realized he was in a hospital room. White walls surrounded him, and medical equipment beeped softly, monitoring his vital signs. He tried to sit up and failed, his muscles refusing to cooperate. A gentle hand pushed him back down. Princess Lyra sat beside his bed, and she was crying. Her violet eyes were red from tears, and her silver hair was disheveled, like she had not slept in days. She pressed her hand against his chest and told him to stay still, that he needed to rest. Morrison croaked out a single word, asking how this was possible. He should be dead. The Harmony Pulse should have killed him, burned out his mind completely. Lyra smiled through her tears and explained what had happened. When Morrison had released the pulse, Starfire had acted on instinct. The dragon loved its rider, Princess Lyra, with the bond that connected them. But in the months since the battle at Broken Sky Station, Starfire had also come to care for Morrison, the human who had first shown kindness to Lyra, who had given her hope when she had none. Bond companions had one ability they could use only once in their entire existence. They could transfer their own life force to sustain someone they considered worthy. Starfire had wrapped Morrison in a cocoon of crystalline energy and poured its essence into him, keeping his mind together when it should have shattered, keeping his body alive when it should have died. The dragon had saved him, but at a terrible cost. Lyra gestured to the corner of the room where Starfire lay curled up, much smaller than before. The dragon crystalline body was dim, barely glowing at all. It would take years for Starfire to recover from what it had done. The bond companion would survive, but it would be weak for a long time. Morrison felt tears running down his own face now. He whispered an apology to Starfire, but the dragon rumbled softly in response, a sound that somehow communicated that it had no regrets. Lyra translated, saying that Starfire considered Morrison part of their family now, and you protected family no matter the cost. Morrison asked about Earth, about the battle, about what had happened after he lost consciousness. Lyra told him everything. The Harmony Pulse had destroyed not just the Devourer, but every single Void Scourge capital ship in the system. The smaller vessels had fled in panic when they saw their command ship die. Within an hour of Morrison releasing the pulse, the enemy was gone. Earth had been saved. 3 billion humans were alive because of what Morrison had done. The satellite network had recorded the entire event and broadcast it across human space. Now every human colony, every settlement knew what had happened. They knew that aliens existed and that humanity had fought alongside them to defend their homeworld. The reaction had been overwhelming. Humans across the galaxy were celebrating but also asking questions about these Stellari allies, about the Bond Riders, about what came next. The Earth government was in chaos, trying to figure out how to handle first contact with dozens of alien species that were now reaching out wanting to talk. Princess Lyra said that she had been speaking with representatives from 48 different species, races that had been hiding from the Void Scourge, afraid to fight back. They had all seen what happened at Earth. They had witnessed how human hope combined with Stellari technology had created a weapon that could actually defeat the enemy. These species wanted to join together to form an alliance that could fight back against the Void Scourge across the entire galaxy. They wanted to build satellite networks like the one around Earth. They wanted to learn how humans maintained hope even in desperate situations. They wanted Princess Lyra to lead them, and they wanted humanity to be part of the alliance. Morrison tried to process all of this information, but his tired mind was struggling. Lyra saw his confusion and smiled gently. She said he did not need to worry about politics right now. He needed to rest and recover. The doctor said he would make a full physical recovery, though it might take months. What Morrison had accomplished would be remembered forever. He had created the first successful Harmony Pulse in Stellari history. He had proven that humans were not just another species to be protected, but powerful allies in the fight against darkness. The other species were calling it the miracle of Earth. Morrison closed his eyes for a moment, thinking about everything that had led to this point. A simple music box given as a gift. A moment of kindness to a stranger who needed help. Such small things that had created such massive consequences. He asked Lyra what happened now, where they went from here. Lyra held up the music box, which she still carried with her always. She said, now they rebuilt. The Stellari survivors were gathering together for the first time in years, forming a proper government again. The alliance of 48 species was being organized. They were calling it the Harmony Coalition after the pulse that had saved Earth, and Morrison was being offered a position as Supreme Commander of the Coalition fleet. If he wanted it, every species agreed that the human who had sacrificed himself to save his world deserved to help lead the forces that would protect all their worlds. Morrison was quiet for a long moment before responding. He said he would accept, but only under certain conditions. Humanity had joined the stars and found a galaxy at war. That was not the future he wanted. He did not want the coalition to be just a military organization. They should build schools and hospitals. They should help species rebuild what the Void Scourge had destroyed. They should explore and discover and create beauty, not just fight enemies. The coalition should be about living, not just surviving. Lyra laughed, and it was a sound of pure joy. She said the other species thought humans were completely insane. Morrison grinned and replied they were probably right. But humanity was the good kind of insane. The kind that looked at impossible situations and refused to give up. The kind that believed tomorrow could be better than today, even when everything suggested otherwise. Over the following months, Morrison recovered his strength. Earth and the Stellari worked together, building more satellites, expanding the network to other human colonies. The Harmony Coalition grew as more species joined, wanting to be part of something that offered real hope against the void. Scourge Lieutenant Amy Rodriguez was promoted to captain and given command of the Wanderer. She used the ship to ferry diplomats and scientists between worlds, helping build connections between species that had never met before. The exploration vessel that had stumbled into a war became a symbol of peace and cooperation. The Bond Riders trained new warriors from species that had never had them before. It turned out that while Stellari had invented the Bond Companions, other races could form connections with dragons too. The Companions responded to courage and hope qualities that existed in many species. Princess Lyra worked tirelessly organizing the coalition, helping survivors rebuild, providing aid to refugees. She carried Morrison music box everywhere and would sometimes open it and listen to the simple melody. When she needed to remember why they fought, Morrison himself spent a year recovering fully before taking up his position as Supreme Commander. When he finally stood on the bridge of the new flagship Unity, he looked around at a crew that included humans and Stellari and a dozen other species all working together. The Unity was a massive vessel built by combining technology from every coalition member. It had weapons powerful enough to fight capital ships, but it also had medical bays and science labs and quarters designed for families. Some crew members brought their children aboard because the coalition believed that protecting the future meant including the future in their mission. Starfire recovered slowly but steadily. The dragon would never be as powerful as before the Harmony Pulse, but Lyra said that was acceptable. They did not need raw power anymore. They had something better. They had unity and hope and the determination to never give up. The void. Scourge were still out there. Still dangerous, but they were no longer unstoppable. Every time they attacked a coalition world, they found Bond Riders waiting for them. They found satellites broadcasting hope. They found species that had learned to fight back. Morrison stood on the bridge of the Unity 5 years after giving a music box to an alien princess and thought about how much had changed. A simple gift given without expectation of reward had led to an alliance that spanned hundreds of worlds. It had given hope to species that had forgotten what hope felt like. Rodriguez contacted him from the Wanderer, reporting that 3 more species wanted to join the coalition. They wanted satellite networks installed, and they wanted teachers to help them understand how to maintain hope during difficult times. Morrison approved the request and told her to send instructors, but to make sure the new members understood something important. Humans were not special. They did not have some magic ability that other species lacked. What humans had was a choice. They chose to hope even when hoping seemed foolish. They chose to believe in better tomorrows, even when today was terrible. They chose to help strangers because it was the right thing to do. Any species could make those same choices. Any species could decide that fear and despair would not rule them. That was the real gift humanity had given the galaxy. Not technology or tactics, but a reminder that hope was always a choice, and choosing hope made you stronger, not weaker. Lyra stood beside Morrison on the bridge of the Unity. Starfire rested nearby, smaller than before, but still present, still bonded to the princess. Morrison looked at his alien friend and smiled. She smiled back, and together they watched the stars. Somewhere in the darkness, the Void Scourge plotted and schemed, planning their next attack. But the coalition was ready. They had learned that light could drive back darkness, that hope could defeat despair, that small acts of kindness could change the fate of galaxies. The war was not over. It would probably continue for years or decades or generations, but for the first time in a very long time, the defenders had momentum. They were not just surviving, but thriving, building something beautiful in the shadow of war. Morrison thought about his daughter who had made a music box so many years ago. She could never have imagined what that simple creation would accomplish. She had just wanted to make her father smile, to give him something that would remind him of home during long voyages, but that was how hope worked. It started small. One person reaching out to another. One act of kindness in a universe that needed more kindness. Those small moments added up, connecting like threads, until they formed something strong enough to hold back the dark. The Harmony Coalition existed because of a music box and a choice. Because Morrison had decided to help a stranger, because Lyra had accepted that help, because both of them had chosen hope over fear, and that choice made all the difference. Morrison looked at Princess Lyra, and she looked back at him, and without speaking, they both understood. They had started something that would outlast them both, something that would spread across the stars, carrying light into darkness, carrying hope into despair. The galaxy would never be the same, and that was exactly as it should be, because sometimes one small gift given with genuine kindness could change everything. Sometimes the simple act of caring could save worlds, and sometimes when you offered an alien princess a music box, you got back something far more valuable than you ever expected. You got friendship and alliance and the knowledge that even in the darkest times, there were beings who would stand beside you and fight for a better tomorrow. That was the promise of the Harmony Coalition, that no one would fight alone anymore, that hope would always have defenders, that kindness would always matter. Morrison smiled and gave the order to proceed to their next destination. There were more worlds to protect, more species to help, more hope to share. The Unity, engines engaged, and the flagship moved forward into the unknown. Behind them, Earth shone blue and beautiful in the darkness, a reminder of what they fought for, a symbol of what could be achieved when different beings chose to work together. Ahead lay challenges and dangers and enemies that would not give up easily, but Morrison was not worried. The coalition was strong. The bonds between species grew deeper every day. And somewhere on his belt, Princess Lyra still carried a simple music box that played a gentle melody, a reminder that the smallest gestures could have the biggest impacts, that kindness was never wasted, that hope was always worth fighting for. The stars beckoned and the Unity answered, carrying its crew forward into a future they would build together. One choice at a time, one act of kindness at a time, one small gift that could change the fate of galaxies.